Greetings from San Francisco. It's a beautiful day. Just had a chance to see the ocean and reflect a little bit on the course thus far. And I felt really the real problem of doing these online lectures, pre-recorded, no students, no opportunity to try to draw energy from all of you. And it just made me want to try to say a few words about what would have happened had we been in a classroom together. This is weird. I'm going to call it an interlude on passion and privilege, and it has to do with really not losing our sense of wonder and appreciating the mystery of the world. And I guess I wanted to start by commenting on something surely I would have talked about by now if we had been in the classroom. And I usually find a way to talk about flying over Greenland. And I've had a number of interesting stories about that, and I won't belabor that today. But what I will say is that if you imagine that if you could have told somebody 500 years ago, 400 years ago, hey, what would you think of the following idea? We'll put you inside of a metal tube. You'll fly up in around 6 miles up in the sky, and you'll be traveling nearly the speed of sound. And just for fun, we'll take you for a flight over this weird place called Greenland, and you can take a look out the window. And well, probably I'm guessing most people would have been terrified to death and probably said no. But if you knew that it was a safe thing to do, who wouldn't take somebody up on such an offer? And so this picture taken out an airplane window over Greenland is just a reminder of the wonder of the world around us and of in a way, the need to ask questions. One of the things that I see up in the center, up the little bit left of center at the top, is one of my favorite sites when flying over Greenland, which is the confluence of different glaciers and the flow patterns that you see as a result, but also the ice. This is a summertime picture, but very beautiful. So so basically, this is 5 minutes, but I wanted to just touch on a few themes that to me are in some sense just as important as the scientific things that we're doing in the class, because I feel that when we go out into the world to try to do science, that at the end of the day, the fuel for that is our curiosity about and trying to understand what accounts for this very crazy, weird world, this weird life that we find ourselves in. Jeremy Bernstein was a physicist who was a science writer for the New York Times, and he wrote this book called The Life It Brings, which is a really nice book, but the title, I think, is the best part. The life it brings, the privilege it brings, that we're able to spend our time thinking about science. And this course is for sure based on a passion. And here I basically quote from the last page of Darwin's On the Origin of Species, where he talked about endless forms, most beautiful, having been and are being evolved. And so our quantitative adventures in the life sciences really are to allow us to appreciate something as absurd as a blue whale. I also wanted to say, I think I've already emphasized this a few times in some of the vignettes, but I really believe that a course like this is meant to engender a feeling of wanting to say those two words, I wonder. And the reason I'm showing you this particular image is because I think it's really spectacular the way that Eratosthenes was interested in, wondered about this, whether the Earth was a sphere, and if so, how big it was. Well, how big a sphere is it? And he figured out a way to answer that I wonder question. So, one of the examples that I like a lot, that I find to be a really beautiful I wonder question, that this course can shed a lot of light on, is mangroves. So mangroves, you'll find them all over the place in oceanic islands. This is a picture that I took in the Galapagos. And mangroves, they're early colonists of volcanic rocks, and they have very weird lifestyles because the plants are actually in salt water, and so they have to find ways to do salt management. And I recommend that you go actually try to look into that a little bit, just to learn something about how mangroves work. And my take is that it's just a really, really beautiful system and situation. And like if you look carefully at that figure or that image that I took, you'll see that there's a tide line. You can see where the tide actually goes up and down. I just wanted to finish with a few quick thoughts about Humboldt and then Darwin. And this sense of wonder, this sense of passion for trying to understand this world that we find ourselves in. So Alexander von Humboldt was a great naturalist, one of the founding naturalists, and he set off on a 5-year voyage when he was a young man. And his real goal was to try and observe and measure things about the world. And on his trip, he discovered many things. A lot of it having to do with biogeography, the distribution of plants as a function of physical conditions, and meaning for example, the plants that you find at different heights on mountains, which he really explored in the Andes. He learned a lot about meteorology. And I love the way he inspired Darwin. Darwin said of him, "During my last year at Cambridge, I read with care and profound interest Humboldt's personal narrative. It stirred up in me a burning zeal to add even the most humble contribution to the noble structure of natural science. No one or a dozen other books influenced me nearly so much." And, the influence here is an influence of passion, I think, more than content. And in a way, that's what I feel is lacking from this online version of physical biology of the cell, because at the end of the day, for a class, for a bunch of people at Caltech, you guys are more technically adept and talented than I'll ever be. But at the same time, I think that cultivating one's sense of wonder and one's sense of a desire to understand things about this world is something that has to be nurtured. So I wanted to comment on Darwin a little bit, who was inspired by Humboldt. And, I like the things he had to say about his experience in school. Nothing could have been worse for the development of my mind than Dr. Butler's school, as it was strictly classical, nothing else being taught except a little ancient geography and history. The school as a means of education to me was simply a blank. And I totally relate to that. Although, as we shall presently see, there were some redeeming features in my life at Cambridge, my time was sadly wasted there, and worse than wasted. And the things that he's talking about that were not wasted really were preparatory for his trip on the Beagle. And I think it's very impressive and interesting how he took this course on botany from Henslow 3 different times. And from Henslow, he learned this little tip that ended up being so important to him. And, some of you might at one point or another in your lives have taken flowers or leaves and put them between the pages of books to save them. And Henslow's tip to Darwin was, don't just do one, do several, because it's sort of a cauldron of variation. He was already priming him to be ready to understand the nature of variation, one of the key ingredients of evolution. And then he also, meaning Darwin, encountered Adam Sedgwick, who was a geologist, and they went to Wales for a couple of weeks, and Sedgwick taught Darwin how to actually read the rock record. So, and I love what Sedgwick had to say. "I cannot promise to teach you all geology. I can only fire your imaginations." And again, the reason that I wanted to give this little interlude today was simply to say that, nothing is more important to me than firing people's imaginations. So, that's basically what I wanted to say. There's a funny story about Darwin being invited to be the naturalist on the Beagle. He went to his father, and his father thought it was a terrible idea, but he told him, "If you can find any man of common sense who advises you to go, I will give my consent." So Darwin was a good record keeper, and he kept records of everything, whether it was this question of whether to go on the Beagle, whether to get married, and many other things. He was quite a record keeper, and so he made a list of all of the reasons that his father thought this would be a bad idea. And in the end, he persuaded his uncle, his father's brother, to that this would be a good idea. And I'll end on the note at the bottom. "The voyage of the Beagle has been by far the most important event in my life and has determined my whole career. I've always felt that I owe to the voyage the first real training or education of my mind." So anyway, why did I want to say this? Just because of a sort of nagging feeling, in a way, a feeling of sadness. I'm sitting here in this room by myself, and I'm going to probably do, what I think on the order of 50 hours worth of lectures just sitting here, but what I'm missing out on is somehow tapping into the excitement for science. The rest of you listening to this will share with me.